What's going on, YouTube? It's Mr. Young. Once again, I promise if I seem drained, it's like my 3,000th video, man. And I finally got one last time I was comfortable with, and YouTube took it. YouTube told me that my video was too long. So if somebody know how to fix that, let me know, because I'm finally using my channel, and I don't know what the heck I'm doing. There's a comment that I made on my last video about black culture not being a part of African culture or not being derived from African culture. It's not. I think people kind of either took it the wrong way, didn't understand what I was saying, or don't really understand what a culture is. But a culture easily defined is way of life. There's really nothing in our current black way of life that we can say we got from Africa. If you think there is, please leave a comment and tell me, because there really is nothing that we do today that we can say was defined by something that happened in Africa. It's not. But I will say that that's not a horrible thing. A lot of people kind of think like, oh, that means we ain't got no culture. We do have a culture. Our culture just wasn't started off from what other people started their culture off from. It was a result of the fact that one day there was a slave owner who had a slave, and the next day some guy passed a law that said the slave had to be freed, and that slave sat there like, wow, this man's job, part of his profession as a slave owner, was to strip my people of everything we knew. Mind, this is a person in 1800s, but his whole bloodline had came from the 1500s of people, who in babies were born, children were born, families grew, from these people from 300 years ago. And how do they know what their culture is? All I've been around is slavery. And at that time, didn't nobody go back to Africa and figure out what the Africans were doing and say, hey, we know we from Africa, they freed us, how do we live? How do we live like you? Nobody did that. They sat there, they realized, you know what, I'm in this land, I'm going to make the best of it, and it is what it is kind of situation. And that's what we now have to realize, that nothing about us is African. We hold on to so many little silly thoughts that are good to boost our morale, but that's as far as they really go. They really don't define who we are. They really don't define why we think certain ways, because all of that is a result of culture. The way you think, the way you interpret life, your spirituality, your God, your language, the food you eat, all of that is culture. We can't look at nothing I just listed and say that came from Africa. We try though. We try to remember, old Kemet. Egypt wasn't called Egypt at one point. It was called Kemet. And in Kemet, people we was kings in Kemet. Because there was an Egyptian pharaoh. There was an Egyptian pharaoh. One pharaoh at a time. But everybody else in Egypt was either one of Pharaoh's employees or just a regular person in Egypt running around. That means that our bloodline ain't from kings. Our bloodline is most likely, the possibility of your bloodline being from the bloodline of an Egyptian king or an African king, anything else, and that is low. Because there was only one king and everybody else in the population was kingdom. So actually, you need to be claiming your bloodline as if you're going to claim a bloodline of African anything having to do with a king. So I was a bloodline of people who had a king. That's it. That it sounds good for us to say the Egyptian thing, but it really does not fit as any part of nothing of significance. And we hold on to that, and it helps, but it doesn't define our culture or anything else. It doesn't help us, but really food. I think the way we eat now really truly defines the fact, or proves the fact that our culture is based on slave culture. Foods we eat. When you kill an animal, there's parts of the animal that you give to the dogs, and the dogs chew the bones. That's parts that don't have that much meat on them, because there's meat, there's bone, and then there's meat, then there's skin, or there's really bone in skin, I should say, kind of like on a skull. You know, your skull is just your bone, small layer of muscle, then skin, and that's how you make a head. So parts of the animal that was on the head and tails were the same way were not very choice, and feet were the same way. You see what I'm naming? Head, tail, feet. None of that is really, truly, culturally anybody's food that had any kind of freedom. You know? So the fact oxtails, pig feet, pig lips, pig ears, you can go to grocery stores and get a jar of random pig face parts, ears, noses, lips, just float in a jar of vinegar with a jalapeno pepper or one of them little red peppers, cayenne peppers on the bottom of it. You can get that. That ain't African culture. And then even the animal itself. When I don't know too much about Africa, but from what I see, when I see African farmers and stuff, they're not normally herding cows. There may be a cow or two, but usually it's goats. Even when you look at the videos, there's a goat tied up outside. They just wait on them to get fat and they can eat it. So how does that have to do with the animals we eat? Anything after that does not even trace back to Africa. It traces back to slavery. The way we feel about life, the way we feel about white people, goes back to slavery. It can't go back to Africa. It goes back to slavery. The way we look at America as rapists and robbers and killers and all of that goes back to what they did during slavery. None of that has to do with Africa. It has to do with slavery. So when I say that our history is African, it's African. When I say that our bloodline is African, our DNA will trace us to Africa. But that does not mean that our culture came from Africa. You know, that's kind of a horrible mentality to look at it. I wanted to show some comments that people made that prove that we need to leave that mentality of our culture in Africa alone, because it's confusing us. At least we need to define what a culture is, because then you will see culturally you're not from Africa, you know, or understand what the definition of a culture is. It says our culture didn't start in Africa. This comes from a man named Jalove 7181. It says our culture didn't start in Africa. You was cool to that point basically, but you lost me with that. Now there is no excuse for you not knowing your black culture. Take a DNA test. It will significantly trace your bloodline in Africa, and you could go from there. I know my black culture. I just don't know African culture. So what part of black culture, once again, is African? Can you say that came from Africa? I use food as an example. We can use anything, the dances, everything. And dances is another comment on here. I can't find the man's comment anymore, but basically what he told me was that there's a stomp dance that Africans do that proves that, you know, our culture is African. Um, Stomping while dancing, it seems like every tribal people did it. You know, they do it all the way in South America, in the Amazon. You ever watch the video of the dudes who had the reeds on their penis? They do it. You know, they hang out in the Amazon, South America. They do it. Even funnier is stomping while you were dancing. Um, uh, is part of country line dancing. Stomping while you're dancing and swing your partner, dose, you don't. Started in Europe. And they do that in Europe to this day. So how does that prove because somebody stomped when they danced that they were that derived from Africa? It doesn't. And speaking of it being tribal, Native Americans did it. And you know, once the slaves were freed, or even while they were running away before slavery was over, there was a group of people called the Exodusters, and what they did was they left the South and moved west. And these were black people. This was before there was even states in the West, when this still belonged to Mexico in the West Coast. Those people hang out with the Native Americans. Now, if the Native Americans dance while they stomp, and that was more recent in history, wouldn't I want to believe that that stomp dance that we keep talking about, people keep saying, but I still don't know what stomp dance it is, actually came from Indians or Native Americans and not Africans? And speaking of the stomp dance, what's the stomp dance? Please tell me what stomp dance we talking about. I really, really want to know what the stomp dance is. Because when I think of stomping and dancing, I think of ATL stomping, I think of crib walking, beat walking, but I don't think of anything else. So please tell me what the stomp dance is. And another one was, he said that, first off, brother, you can look at American money. This is from by a guy named Tiarka. I'm gonna paraphrase it, and you can see traces of Africa in American money. They destroyed everything, but they destroyed a lot, but they didn't destroy everything. If you knew who you were, they even destroyed Tassetti in your lifetime. I know who I am. Do you know who you are? Because you're Black American, you're not African. He says that if you look at the dollar bill, you can't trade a dollar bill without seeing signs of Africa. I'm not saying that you can't see signs of Africa, because America, anybody who knows anything about America knows that anything that happened in America came from somebody stealing something from somebody. So they probably stole some trading things from Africa. They stole a whole lot from European culture. They stole a whole lot from Latin culture. They was stealing. That's what they were doing. America was based on a melting pot of all these different cultures coming together, but in reality, they stole what they wanted to out these cultures and made it theirs. Parts of our language, things that we say, all have different derivatives in Greek, all of that. That's because our culture, English itself, isn't even based on English. It's based on everybody else's culture and everybody else's language. You know? So I don't think that anybody who tells me that they have African culture and they're good with African culture and they haven't spent time studying Africa knows what they're talking about. Because if you told me that you have African culture, you probably tell me what country in Africa or region in Africa's culture that you use. Because Africa is made up of so many countries. You can't just say that you have African culture. All of those countries think differently, act differently, do different things. And all those things they do, think, and act differently define their culture. So until you can tell me what African country's culture you picked up, you ain't got no African culture. You just picked up some paintings, picked up some statues, got some zebra paintings and some little African warrior statues, and stuck them up in your house and said, and put a dashiki on and said you was right with the motherland. And put your fist up. There you go, so you can see it. See? And he did that, and that's stupid. But I believe that if we as a people will just realize, you know what, our history starts in Africa, but our culture and how we do things today really did not start in Africa. It was rebuilt after slavery. We have something to really stand upon. You know, it's not that bad. You know, when I look at it, I'm saying, okay, I'm a man. I can spend my whole life looking backwards and trying to find out African culture and rebuilding African culture and this and that. But where will we get as a people? Where will we get as black people in America? We wouldn't get nowhere. But if we say, you know what? Let's look at this thing like this. Africa was there. That's where our bloodline is from. That's who we came from. But who we are was defined by the people who were slaves and then freed and then built something out of nothing. And from there, we can take that and make even more from what they built. We'll be a better people in the end. So I'm going to set the challenge for it like this. If you can think of something in current African American culture that really came from Africa and point it out to me, and really came from Africa, and somebody didn't just go buy a picture or a statue or something, or African war mask or something, and you can find some things in our culture that really show that our culture is defined by African culture, make a video response and post it, and my next video that I make will be denouncing this one. The challenge is set forth. Everybody be blessed. Have a good day. Peace.